Hello and welcome back to Amoeba Savant. Today I'm going to continue with the Brothers Karamazov, even though there are some hiccups. I'm just going to keep going. We are on book 3 called The Sensualists, and this is chapter 4, The Confession of an Ardent Heart in Prose. Please subscribe. I led a wild and drunken life, Dmitry went on. You heard Father say this morning that I thought nothing of spending a few thousand rubles on seducing some innocent girl. That's a disgusting lie. Absolutely unfounded. Those things never required any money at all anyway. To me, money is only an accessory. It is a means to satisfy the impulses of the moment, to create the right atmosphere. Today, it may be a lady, but tomorrow a whore may take her place. And I want them each to have a great time, and so I throw money around by the handful. I want them to have music, glitter, gypsies, everything. And if I have to, I'll give them money too, for some women take money and take it with passion too. I admit that pleases them and makes them thankful. But some ladies liked me too. Not all, of course, but some did. However, I prefer the little back streets and dark alleys to the large, lighted squares, because all kinds of unexpected things happened there, because in the filthy gutters I felt I could find natural human gems. Of course, I'm speaking figuratively. In reality, there are no such alleys and gutters in that town, but there were moral gutters, all right. If you were like me, you'd understand right away what I mean. I liked debauchery, and I liked the shame it brought down on me. And I enjoyed cruelty. So am I not just a bedbug, a vicious insect? Well, I'm a Karamazov. Once, in winter, they had a big picnic outside town. All our society people drove out there in 7 troikas. Sitting in a dark corner of a sleigh, I started pressing the hand of the girl who sat next to me, and I forced her to accept my kisses. She was a sweet child, gentle and helpless, the daughter of a local official. She let me do pretty much as I pleased in the darkness. The poor child imagined that I'd come to the house the next morning and proposed to her. I was somehow considered an eligible bachelor. But for 5 months after that, I never said one word to her. I noticed, though, at various dances, we had a lot of dancing parties, that her eyes would flash a look of helpless anger at me. That game aroused the insect sensuality that I was nurturing within me. Well, 5 months later she married a civil servant and left the town, still angry, perhaps still in love with me. Anyway, she's happily married now. I want you to note, though, that I never mentioned it to anyone or did anything that could have injured her reputation because, beastly though I may be in my desires and much though I love to do vicious things, I am not dishonorable. I see you're blushing and your eyes are flashing, but I suppose you've had enough of listening to all this filth. But what you've heard so far is no more than Paul de Kock's little flowers, although the nasty insect was already growing in my soul. I have a whole collection of such reminiscences, my boy, and may God bless them all. I've always wanted to stay on good terms with a woman after breaking off with her. I never betrayed any of them, never ruined a single reputation. But enough of that, because, as I suppose you imagine, I didn't call you in here just to tell you all this nonsense. No, Alyosha, I'm about to tell you something much more interesting. Don't be surprised, however, if you find me quite unashamed in telling you my story. Indeed, I somehow enjoy telling it to you. You're saying that because I blushed, Alyosha said suddenly? But it was not anything you said or have done that made me blush. It was the fact that I'm just the same as you are. What? You? Aren't you going a bit far now? No, not too far, Alyosha said with an excitement which showed that the thought had been with him for quite a while already. We're on the same ladder. I'm on the bottom rung while you're much higher up, perhaps on the 30th ring. That's how I picture it. But it doesn't make much difference. It's the same sort of thing. and once a man has stepped onto the bottom rung, he is sure to climb to the top. So it'd be best not to step onto the ladder at all, wouldn't it? Well, certainly if one could help it. But can't you help it? It doesn't look as if I can. Be quiet, Alyosha, be quiet, my dear boy. I'm so moved I feel like kissing your hand. That bitch Grushenka who understands so much about men told me once that she'd eat you up one of these days, but I don't want to go on about that. Let's leave that field befouled by fly droppings and go on to my private tragedy, that is, back again to another field befouled by fly droppings. The trouble is, although our nasty old man lied about my way of seducing innocent girls, something of that sort did actually happen in my tragedy, but only once, and even then it didn't come off. The old man was telling that cockeyed tale about me, but he knows nothing about this. You'll be the first person I've told it to, except, of course, for Ivan, for he knows everything and knew it all long before you. But Ivan is silent as the grave. Ivan? Silent as the grave? Yes, he certainly is. Alyosha looked at Dmitry with great concentration. Although I held a second lieutenant's rank in that battalion of the Line Regiment, I was under a sort of permanent surveillance, like a former convict or something. Yet the town received me very nicely. I threw money around, people thought I was rich, and I ended up believing it myself. There must have been something else about me that pleased them, though, and even if they sometimes shook their heads, they liked me all right. Not so my commanding officer, an old lieutenant colonel. He had it in for me and kept trying to get me in trouble, but it wasn't all that easy for him because I had some highly placed friends and, besides, the whole town was on my side. It was partly my own fault because I deliberately refused to treat him with proper respect. I was too proud to. That stubborn old fellow, who was really a kind, decent, generous man, had been married twice and both his wives had died. His first wife had been a woman of humble origin and had left him a daughter who looked rather common, too. When I was there, she was already old maidish at 24. She lived with her father and an aunt, her mother's sister. The aunt was a common woman who never said a word, while the niece was a common woman full of words and fire. I like to say a kind word about people when I'm reminiscing about them, so let me tell you, my boy, I've never met a woman with a more charming character than this Agifa. She wasn't bad-looking either, to the Russian taste, tall, strong, with a full figure and beautiful eyes, although her face was somewhat coarse. 2 fellows had asked her hand in marriage, but she had turned them down and remained a spinster. Yet she was always gay and cheerful. We became good friends. No, not the way you think. It was all clean this time and above board, just friendly. Why, I've often been good friends with women without there being anything else to it. I would talk to her frankly about all kinds of shocking things, but it was all right with her. She just left. There were many women who like us to talk to them frankly. I want you to note that. But this one was still a virgin, and it amused me to see her listening to it all. And one more thing, it was somehow quite impossible to refer to her as a young lady. Perhaps it was partly because she and her aunt, although they lived in the house, did not behave like the members of the family they were, but rather like inferiors, as if they did not belong into our society. Everyone loved Agafia, though, and they needed her because she was a marvelous dressmaker. She had a real talent for it, and she would make dresses for the ladies just to help them out, never asking them for anything in exchange, although if they really insisted on giving her things or money as presents, she would accept them. But her father, the lieutenant colonel, was quite a different matter. He was one of the prominent personalities of our town. He lived on a grand scale, entertained lavishly, gave dinners and balls. When I joined his battalion, the whole town was talking about the imminent arrival of the lieutenant colonel's second daughter, a staggering young beauty who had just graduated from one of the most elegant Petersburg boarding schools. This was Katerina, his daughter by his second wife. Unlike the first, the second wife came from an old and distinguished family and was the daughter of a general, although, as far as I know, she did not bring the lieutenant colonel any money either. So, Katerina had nothing but a distinguished background to recommend her, and, except for some vague possibility of inheriting something from some relative or other, she had no money to her name at all. Nevertheless, when she arrived, and she had just come to spend some time with her family, not to stay, our whole town seemed to come to life. Our most distinguished ladies, 2 of them the wives of generals and 1 of a full colonel, and all the others behind them at once displayed great eagerness to entertain her, vying with one another to invite her to balls and picnics. They even managed to organize a gala evening with tableaux vivants for the benefit of some distressed governesses, and always Katerina was the queen of the event. But that was none of my concern, and I went right on drinking and having a wild time. In fact, just at that time I pulled off something so wild that the whole town resounded with it. I remember I saw her for the first time at my battery commander's one evening. Out of the corner of my eye I saw her looking me over, but I didn't go over to introduce myself. Let her know, I thought, that there's someone here who's not interested in her. It was not until another party some time later that I actually spoke to her. And then she hardly glanced at me, and the corners of her mouth turned down in scorn. So that's how she feels, I thought. All right, my girl, I'll teach you a lesson. I often acted like a terrible heel at that time, and I was well aware of it myself. And I was also instinctively aware that this little Katya was no innocent schoolgirl, but a person with a strong character, a truly honorable young lady, and above all, someone with both a good education and an acute intelligence, whereas I had neither. You may think that I was about to propose to her, Alyosha, but I had no such intention. All I wanted was to make her pay for not properly appreciating the dashing young gentleman that I was, and in the meantime I went on drinking and painting the town red. Finally, the lieutenant colonel put me under house arrest for 3 days. It was just then that I received 6,000 rubles from father after sending him an officially signed document renouncing all my rights and stating that I'd received everything that was due to me and that I would not ask him for anything anymore. The thing is, Alyosha, I understood nothing in my financial dealings with father at that time, or until very recently, perhaps even till today. But to hell with that. We'll get to it later. The day I received the 6,000, I also received a letter from a friend of mine containing a very curious piece of information, namely, that my lieutenant colonel's superiors were displeased with him. He was suspected of irregularities. In brief, his enemies were preparing a nice surprise for him. And sure enough, soon the general in charge of our division arrived and gave him hell. A little later, the lieutenant colonel was asked to hand in his resignation. I won't go in all the details here, how it came about, etc., but his enemies in town certainly had something to do with it. In any case, people suddenly became very cool toward him, and all the members of his family, and even his friends, turned their backs on him. And this was the moment I chose to play my first trick. I met Agafya, with whom I had remained on friendly terms. I hear, I said to her, that your papa is short 4,500 rubles of government money. What are you talking about, she said. The general was just here and every ruble was there. It was there then, but today it's all gone. She looked terribly upset. Don't frighten me, please. Where did you hear that? Don't worry, I told her. I won't tell anyone. I'll be as silent as the grave about it. What I actually want to tell you was that in case of, let's call it an emergency, I mean when they ask your papa to produce those 4,500 that he doesn't have, well, rather than let him be court-martialed and demoted to the ranks in his old age, I suggest you secretly send me your learned little sister, because I've just received some money and I guess I could let her have, say, 4,000. And I promised to keep it secret. You pig, she said. You vicious, nasty pig. How dare you? Yes, that was what she called me, a pig. And she walked off in terrible indignation as I shouted after her once more not to worry, that I'd keep it all strictly confidential and secret. Those 2 women, that is, Agafya and her aunt, proved to be a couple of real angels. They adored Agafya's little sister Katya, spoiled and proud as she was. In fact, they waited on her hand and foot as if they were her servants. Nevertheless, as I found out later, Agafya went straight to Katerina and repeated everything I had said. which of course was exactly what I had hoped she'd do. All of a sudden a new major arrived in town. He had come, it turned out, to take over our battalion. Just as suddenly the old lieutenant colonel became very sick and was unable to leave the house for 2 days, so he couldn't hand over the government funds. Our medical officer Kravchenko insisted that he really was ill, but there was something I knew confidentially from an unimpeachable source and, indeed, had known for a long time. Namely, that for 4 years after the accounts had been checked by the army inspectors, the monies entrusted to the colonel would disappear for a certain length of time. Our colonel would lend the money to a local merchant, Trifonov, a bearded widower who wore gold-rimmed glasses and was a most reliable man. Trifonov went off to the annual fair, made various financial transactions, and always returned the money to the colonel, along with presents from the fair and interest on the capital. Only this time, when Trifonov came back from the fair, he had no money to pay back, as I found out accidentally from his slobbering son and heir, the most depraved youth the world has ever seen. The colonel went dashing over to Trifonov's, but the merchant cut him off. "I never received any money from you, nor could you possibly have given me any." That was all he had to say. And so our colonel was home with a towel wrapped around his head and the 3 women taking turns putting ice in it, when suddenly a messenger appeared with a note demanding that the monies be handed over at once, within 2 hours. He signed the messenger's book, I saw the signature later myself, got up, saying he was going to put on his uniform, went to his bedroom, took down his double-barreled shotgun, loaded it with an army bullet, removed his right boot, pressed the barrel against his breast, and started feeling for the trigger with his big toe. But Agafya, remembering what I'd told her and suspecting that her father might try something of the sort, stole up to the bedroom door, peeped through a crack, and saw what he was up to. She rushed in, threw herself on him from behind, throwing her arms around him. The gun went off and the bullet hit the ceiling without harming anyone. In the meantime, the others dashed in, took away the shotgun, and held the old man's arms. I found out all these little details later, but at the time, I was at home. It was getting dark, and I decided to go out. I dressed, combed my hair, put some eau de cologne on my handkerchief, took my cap, and was about to leave when the door opened, and there she was, Katerina, standing in my room. Strangely enough, she had met no one she knew on her way, and no one saw her enter my lodgings. So, no one in town was aware of her visit. I rented my rooms from 2 aged ladies, both the widows of civil servants, who were very considerate to me, did whatever I asked them, and never breathed a word to anybody about Katerina's visit, as I expressly asked them not to. Of course, I realized at once what she wanted. She was staring straight into my face as she came in, and there was a strange determination, even arrogance in her dark eyes, although around her lips there were signs of wavering. "My sister told me that you'd give me 4,500 rubles if I came in person. Well, here I am. So give me the money." She fired off, but then she couldn't go on. She gasped. Her voice failed her, and her lips and the lines around the corners of her lips quivered. "Hey, Alyosha, my boy, are you still following me, or have you fallen asleep?" "I know you'll tell me the whole truth, Mitya," Alyosha muttered nervously. "That's just what I'll tell you. I will be the truth, and I won't spare myself." Well, the first thought that came to me was the one a Karamazov would be likely to have under such circumstances. You know, I was once bitten by a centipede and was in bed for 2 weeks with a high fever. So now I felt as if a centipede or some other noxious insect had again stung my heart and contaminated me. I suppose you see what I mean, don't you? I looked her over head to toe. Why, you've seen her. You know how beautiful she is. But there was something else in her then, besides her beauty. She seemed even more beautiful to me at that moment because she was noble and generous while I was a low pig. She was magnanimously sacrificing herself for her father, while I was just a bedbug. And now I felt she was at my mercy, me, the pig, and the bedbug. The whole of her, body and soul. She was cornered. Let me tell you that this thought I had, a centipede's thought, gripped my heart so violently that it was almost blood white from the pain alone. There seemed to be no room for any inner struggle on my part. I was going to act like a vicious bug, like a tarantula, just go ahead without any restraint. It took my breath away. I want you to understand, Alyosha, that of course I'd have gone over to their house afterward and asked for her hand in marriage, finishing it all decently, if I may call it that, and no one would or could have known anything about it because, for all my beastly desires, I am, after all, an honorable man. But then it was as though someone whispered into my ear, "You can be sure, if you go to ask for her hand tomorrow, that with a character like hers, she'll refuse to receive you and order her flunky to throw you out of the house, as if challenging you to go ahead and cry it from the rooftops to show you that she isn't afraid of you." I looked at her and saw that the voice in my ear wasn't lying. I knew that was exactly the way it would be. They'd kick me out. I could tell it from her expression at that moment. I felt my blood seething with anger within me, and I wanted to play a filthy, piggish trick on her, to treat her the way some vulgar shopkeeper would have under the circumstances. I thought I'd look at her scornfully as she stood there in front of me and say in that special tone that shop assistants use when they're being insolent, "You mean you'd really expect me to give you 4,000 rubles for that? Don't you see, ma'am, it was a joke. I never really meant it. It was rather gullible of you to believe that I'd pay you so much. I suppose I'd let you have a couple hundred. Indeed, I'd be glad to pay you that, but 4,000, that's quite a different matter. I wouldn't think of wasting a sum like that so thoughtlessly. I'm afraid you took all this trouble for nothing." Of course, I realized I would lose everything, for she would run away, but it would have been an infernally clever revenge that would have been worth all the rest. Even if it meant I'd suffer remorse all the rest of my life, it was terribly tempting to go through with that trick now. Believe me, never before had I looked at any woman with hatred at such a moment, but this once. I just stood there and for maybe 3, maybe 5 seconds stared at her with a terrifying hatred, with the kind of hatred that is only a hair's breadth from the maddest, most desperate love. I walked over to the window and put my forehead against the ice-cold pane. I remember the ice burning my forehead like a flame. Don't worry, I didn't keep her waiting long. I turned back to the room, went to the desk, pulled out the drawer, and took the 5% letter of credit for 5,000 rubles, which I had put in the French dictionary, and showed it to her. Then I folded it, handed it to her, opened the door leading to the entrance, stepped back, and bowed to the waist with the deepest and most sincere reverence, and I mean reverence. Her whole body shuddered. She looked at me intently for a second, turned terribly pale as a sheet, and all of a sudden knelt down and bowed to the ground to me like a simple Russian woman, and certainly not like a finishing school graduate. Then she jumped up and ran out. When she ran out, I drew my saber. I was wearing it because I was about to go out when she came in, and was going to thrust it into my chest. I'm not sure why I wanted to do that. I realize how stupid it would have been, but I suppose it was the sheer ecstasy of the moment. Can you understand, Alyosha, that there are moments of ecstasy in which we could kill ourselves? But I didn't stab myself. I kissed the blade and sheathed it. Something, by the way, that I didn't have to mention to you. Actually, I believe that, in telling you all about the struggle that took place in me, I twisted things a little to make myself look a bit better. But I don't care if I did. The hell with all this spying on the human heart. Well, that's what happened between Katerina and myself. Now you and Ivan know about it, and no one else. Dmitry stood up. He was tense. He took a handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Then he sat down again, not in the same place as before, but on a bench that stood by the opposite wall, so that to see him, Alyosha had to turn completely around. And that's the end of that chapter. What do you think about what he did, what he's saying, what he means, how he treated Katerina and her family, even his friend? And what do you think Alyosha means by his comment that he's on the bottom rung of the same ladder as the other Karamazovs? That was kind of an intriguing little tidbit. Hopefully I know they'll get more into it. We'll get more into it as the story progresses. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please like the video. Share with anybody who is interested in the story. And I'll see you in the next video where I read chapter 5 called The Confession of an Ardent Heart, Head Over Heels. See you then. Bye.